This is the Decarbonization Disruptors podcast. I am your host, Matthew Cohen. On this episode of our podcast, I am very pleased to welcome Lisa Roy, Chief Executive Officer of Optimum Energy. Lisa was recently appointed as a CEO of Optimum, where she brings 30 years of experience in the ever-evolving energy optimization space. Optimum Energy provides holistic HVAC system optimization delivered through a unique end-to-end approach that includes innovative technology, engineering expertise, and creative financial solutions. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Matthew. Here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I was definitely excited to meet you and learn more about your career, what you're doing at Optimum. And I've known Optimum for a very long time. We have a few placements ourselves within the organization over the years and have followed the trajectory of the company. And it just seems like a really awesome place. And I'm excited to hear more about what you're doing there. So I wanted first to get into your background because I noticed, earlier in your career, as opposed to maybe more engineering or product focused, you started your career more on the sales and sales management side, and then worked your way through into executive positions. So I was curious what motivated you to focus on sales earlier in the career, and then also we have an influx of people we see coming into the industry. So I'm curious kind of advice you'd give to those coming into the space on where the in-demand roles are and where they should focus.
Okay, great. Yeah. I actually started my career some 30 years ago, actually in operations. I have an electrical engineering degree where I focused on computer programming and science. So when I started a long time ago, I started actually as a programmer doing energy efficiency programming in large facilities for healthcare, state government, higher ed institutions. I actually fell in love with being able to help customers solve the problems around energy efficiency and improve their overall operations. So I quickly, after spending maybe 3 years in operations and engineering, moved into sales, where I had a better opportunity to engage with clients, understand what some of their issues were, and then help them design a way to be able to lower the overall cost in a building, either through energy efficiency programs or operational changes that they had to be able to get more for their dollar when they were spending. I was really fascinated with being able to work with pretty successful organizations, pretty people that are high up in those organizations, the vice president of facilities or the chief operating officers who, if it's healthcare, know a lot about healthcare. They know a lot about all of the things that are required to better serve their patients, how to make their staff more productive. But when it came to this building and the facility and how it enabled them to do their work, it was a bit of a black hole. So being able to identify some of the areas that they needed support or help or problems that they were trying to solve, and use the team that we had in place and the technology to be able to solve for that, I thought was pretty exciting. And actually, that drive to be able to solve problems for customers and in the market really helped to catapult my career. I spent a number of years in sales. I actually loved that role. Then spent a great bit of time in sales management, and then had a great opportunity to do a number of different roles that included running the entire, what I would call energy and sustainability business for a large corporation. I moved that into a global role, and then really spent the last few years of my big corporate job, I would say, in doing strategy and M&A, which was really focused on what emerging market trends are happening across the globe and how they're going to affect our customers, and how do we help them solve? How do we get to be in a better position to help them solve for that? So been around a while, Matthew, and got a lot of opportunity to see different ways that customers solve for things like energy efficiency and how to improve operations and building operations across the globe, and how some of the pending market trends of the future are going to affect the way that happens today. Yeah, great question. Well, there's a one looming kind of labor constraint in the United States, and there's This is no secret, right? That the skilled trade labor is, there's going to be a shortage. There's more people retiring out of those trades than there are coming into those trades. And that's around like HVAC, and you think about controls technicians. So that particular constraint has started to evolve a few years back. It's going to continue to be an issue. However, on the opposite side of that trade, there's quite a bit of data, information, analytics that are available to large corporations, to customers, just readily available in this space that can change the way that buildings run. So when I think of future roles, places to focus, what I actually advise my children and like my friends' kids, and actually most of the people that I mentor, is around the data analytics component of the business. I think there's probably more data than we know what to do with. And one of the biggest issues that many companies face and many organizations face is too much of it coming at them too quickly, that they're not able to discern what's important or not, and then be able to action it. So if you can't figure out all the stuff flying at you, you surely cannot action it in a way that actually gives you the benefit of what it was there for in the first place. So even with large, energy management systems or any type of programs that sit on top of facilities that ingest data from the outside and ingest data from the inside, including alarms and notifications, the ability to be able to take that information and digest it down to usable pieces of data that can change the way that you operate your building, that improves operations, that improves energy efficiency, is the future. And, we are all solving for that today, but I think there's going to be more of it, more availability in the marketplace, and there's going to be more people that are needed to be able to do that type of work.
And in your career and in the time that you've spent in a lot of different roles, how have you seen the needs of building owners and operators change? I mean, obviously, we've seen the commercial real estate market go through a whirlwind of changes where operators' needs are ever evolving. How have you seen that progression change between, I just want to save energy, to kind of where they are now and the needs that they have?
Yeah. So you hit on one already, which is space utilization, right? How do you become very, very flexible in being predictive about how your space is being used in the past, but how it needs to be used in the future, so that it's an easy, cost-effective way to make those modifications when required. But I would say probably the two most fundamental changes that are like decades and shifting. The first one is around energy. As it relates to that energy, the need is higher and the environment is far more complex than it's ever been before. And you think about the growth of in-use electrification. I mean, that's happening now, but in the coming decades, it's going to increase, astronomically, so much that the infrastructure is going to go beyond its limits. We're not going to have enough, right? So the decisions that customers are forced to make today isn't just about themselves. Today, in the past, it was like, how do I get my energy demand down and make my, building more operational and more efficient, which is a simpler problem to solve. So there's many companies out in the space. There's many programs out in the space that allow for customers to be able to do that demand side reduction in an easy way. Like, people know what they are. It's like lighting and roof replacements and changing out like for like mechanical equipment. But when you start to think about, well, I have to be sustainable and have a reliable energy source, and I'm scared that the grid's not going to be there for me, do I do on-site generation? Do I use renewables? Do I have an interactivity with the grid? Those types of considerations are now forced onto an end user's plate. And that's far more complex probably than in the past. So I think that's probably the number one change, is the complexity of making decisions, even if you want to do something simple like build a new plant. Well, that's different in today's world than it was, 15 years ago. The second probably biggest difference I see is the labor component that we just talked about. I mean, it's no surprise to people, but people who run buildings today are faced with, I'm struggling to retain the staff that I have. I'm struggling to recruit for the future. So how do I change the way that I operate so that I have a better, sustainable way to do what I need to do for the future? A lot of that, I believe, has to do with technology and data, and how you leverage remote capability, how you leverage data that's actually available to you to run your building smarter, hopefully with less personnel or with an assistance from a centralized group that can make you more efficient in the number of people that you actually need to effectively run that facility. So I think those two areas are probably the biggest, trends that are going to drive the way that buildings are operated in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that probably goes into your time now at Optimum, which a lot of those offerings that you do solve those problems. I was curious, kind of what was the motivating factor for you to becoming the CEO of Optimum, given your long history in executive roles, and then coming into a CEO role for the first time. What was the process you went through to kind of make that transition into your new position?
Okay, great. Yeah, so why Optimum Energy? I think the simplest answer to boil it down is that the company is uniquely positioned to fill a need in the market that's not being met. Which to me goes back to how do you help customers achieve some of these things that they're trying to do? And like I mentioned before, there are plenty of people doing things like energy efficiency, and they do them really well. And they've grown in those businesses and almost stamped and repeated the models that were deployed. I fundamentally know that that's not enough to help solve the problems of the future. So the things that have to be added to that as it relates to being able to help a customer solution or beyond the simple understanding of, I'd call it energy engineers, and you mentioned that. We always need more of those, by the way. But energy engineers that are pretty good at like doing the simple replacements or the simple things that drive down energy demand, we need folks that are like really skilled at being able to identify all of the alternatives that are available in a space and make some of the more critical fuel source decisions up front. That do we have on-site generation, and how does that work, and how do you even evaluate that over a 30-year time frame? Not just the short 10-year time frame and the upfront capital costs, but the total life cycle of the facility and the decisions you're trying to make. So that's kind of one critical skill set that Optimum brings to the table. In the addition is the technology that the company has founded for like 20 years. It's proven in the space that actually drives out efficiency in a central plant, moving that technology into the building, doing the same things on the air side. That's unique in the market. The remote capability and the remote diagnostics that are a part of what the company has to offer is what customers need today, but also for the future, as we talked about that labor constraint. So the company was just really set up with some differentiators that I thought were critical to be successful in the future. The second reason is, the company has a strong vision of where it wants to go and strong investment behind it, because you've got to build out some of these capabilities for the future, and having a vision, having the investment capability, and really the desire to go after that market pretty aggressively is kind of the things that pull together, at least for me, as being something that I was excited to join the team. What we're getting in terms of feedback from customers, we do a lot of work with what I would call advanced manufacturing, some very prominent names in pharmaceutical or in like making of computer chips, which their manufacturing process, as you can imagine, is super critical. Uptime is super critical, but their production process is super energy intensive. So anytime that they're making a decision about how to add energy because they're expanding production, that whole conversation around, can I be as efficient as possible? How do I do that? We can do that with our technology. But the next then probably change even in their decision making that I'm seeing is these big corporations have what I call self-mandated decarbonization targets, right? We're going to be net zero by 2040. By 2030, we want a 44% reduction in decarbonization across all of our sites. So you think about a manufacturing site, I'm trying to expand capacity, which means I need more energy, yet we want to decarbonize and cut that by 44%. And oh, by the way, in some of these cases where we've been working with the customer for 10 years, we've already done the demand reduction side. That's in the baseline. So the 44% reductions on top of that. So when you have a problem like that you're trying to solve, more energy, but decarbonize while you're doing this, you have to change fuel sources, which is like a complete redesign of the structure of potentially that manufacturing site. So we see these challenges as new and quite different than what I saw, 20 years ago or even 15 years ago that customers brought to us. So our team's pretty skilled at being able to take them through the analysis of what the options are, not only what the cost is up front, but that life cycle impact, and actually predict the cost from an energy perspective, but also the replacement costs, the all of the things associated with it, so that they have a full performer to help make a decision. The next thing that I see happening is those mandates from like big corporations around decarbonization goals are unfunded. I mean, the plan to get there isn't detailed out yet because it's a decade away. So nor is the funding. So one of the things that we're asked to do is in an example like the one I gave, where you have a site that's expanding their production, they want the capital to go to the things that produce revenue. So when they're having to build out a full new energy source for their energy associated with that site, the option of being able to bring capital to the table and help that fund it in a more creative way is very, very attractive. So now what I see, and this is kind of the reason why I think a company like Optimum Energy is going to be successful for the future, is we bring all of that to the table. The design evaluation up front, the implementation, the technology associated with operations and that remote operations support, and we're bringing the financial mechanisms and options to the table. So a customer has the opportunity to decide the best thing for them. We're not forcing any one way or any portion of a solution down their throat. We're helping them decide the best thing for them to meet the goals that they have on the table.
What I'm curious about it, because you mentioned something earlier, which was kind of the issue of having too much data coming into the system and what you do with it. So I'm curious how you see software as a service like yours and others role in the overall ecosystem of energy optimization, and what other things are needed beyond just the data and software to make it effective, beyond just having it and deciding what to do with it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot with machine learning and analytics on top of any software that's required to the sift through the information, understand how to use it, and actually give the operators, if you will, instructions or options of what to do next. So a lot of our investment, since Optimum Energy has been founded, there's been $70 million of investment poured back into the company around this particular topic, which is around machine learning and analytics on the platform. Because for example, our platform sits on top of any energy management system. So when I talk about the data ingestion through all of these systems, it could be any system, but the information on top, or the analytics on top of picking out what data is important, learning what is actually how should it be operating compared to what it is operating. So for example, we could have our software will detect if a meter is off by like 0.5% over a year's time frame. A human would never do that. So you're using software to help identify things that kind of miss the human eye, but also take what's important out of the data and turn it into useful information, which is, hey, go fix that meter because it's costing you a lot of money. And how much does that actual one correction provide to that entity? That's all part of the programming that goes along with it. So the analytics layer and adding machine learning to that, to me, is one critical area. The second is being able to have, as I mentioned before, a way for operators to have a place to call phone home. So there's a lot of information, there's a lot of data, a valve shut down or a chiller shut down. So my whole sequencing is off. So our programming will actually recommend how to change that sequencing, but many operators are unsure. They have a duty to do, which is to keep their facilities up and running. We have a remote operations center. So being able to have information, have that data, and have instruction, but also have the option to override anything that would be critical in that plant, and or have a phone call to actually talk through what the options are and what's best for that facility at that moment with that corrective action that needs to happen.
I'd be curious to get your perspective. I think you have a really unique perspective on this, which is how we can highlight the need for a greater awareness of curbing carbon emissions from the built environment? I mean, you and I both know, being in the industry a while, how much carbon emissions come from the built environment and what the opportunities are, especially in the US, where there's still a significant percentage of buildings that haven't taken advantage of technology and services, but it's not talked about enough. Yeah, I think there's good amount of investment from private equity and some other sources, but probably not as much as there could be. So what can be done to kind of bring a greater awareness to this world that can really help to meet the decarbonization goals that a lot of these companies have?
Matthew, I think people know, they know, but they can't act. And the primary reason why people can't act, I'll go back to the example I gave, is even if I would love to decarbonize and I'm in a for-profit company and I want to decarbonize and I have a simple task to do and I'm expanding my production capacity, the cost to decarbonize while I expand capacity is far greater than if you just expanded capacity. So the ROI doesn't work unless there's tax incentives or unless there's benefits, unless there's something that gives a float to those financials or that financial model and that option. It's going to be very hard for many organizations to be able to tackle a decarbonization target effectively. So when I think of awareness, I think of programs. I mean, you can see what happened in Europe over the past few years with an energy crisis. The government, in that case, did a pretty good job of stepping in and providing those types of programs that allowed the market to help solve the problems with end users, both residential and commercial customers, to help or lighten the load on the energy crisis. I think for the U.S., there are things like you see a delay in like heat pumps coming to this market because designers and installers have installed the same way for decades, and without some type of support that says, hey, this is going to help the financial analysis on day one when you go to implement the project, if it doesn't make financial sense, it's really hard for folks to be able to tackle that issue when they're trying to do a project in that moment. I do start to see that a lot of the incentive programs are being trickled out from the federal government throughout all of the states. There was one recently highlighted called RISE PA, which is in Pennsylvania, which is a pretty aggressive program and an acknowledgement that the majority of the emissions comes from the industrial sector in that state. And they rallied the federal government for funding, and now they're distributing that funding for projects. That is a huge driver to help decarbonize Pennsylvania. So I think things like that, it's going to be what's required to speed up this decarbonization implementation in the U.S.
That's interesting because I think I've heard a lot of people, especially some of the guests on the podcast, say that something similar, which is there has to be a ROI incentive, but I haven't heard a ton about having programs be the driver. I've heard more of the product and the solution be the driver. So do you think there's going to be a balance in that? Do you think we're going to get to a point where we're not going to be able to rely on state and federal incentive programs and the technology or the service that you're providing just has to create the ROI or it's not going to be effective?
I think for large scale decarbonization, a combination of all is going to be required.
Makes sense. One thing I'd be interested to hear from your perspective is what technologies are on the horizon that you see they're going to be implemented in the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's more battery storage, whether it is more bidirectional grid access. What's kind of the next thing you see that is going to be implemented that we're going to want to pay attention to?
I think AI powered, I say AI, I call it machine learning powered platforms and dynamics in buildings is going to help with demand and efficiency with what you have. I think the things that you mentioned in terms of battery storage, additional renewables, on-site generation, there's going to have to be interactivity with the grid. I think I started our conversation today with this acknowledgement that electrification is going to take off. There's not enough infrastructure to support that. So when people build on-site generation to be able to take care of themselves and they don't need it, it makes a ton of sense that they would want to sell it back to an entity that could, whether it's another owner down the street or the utility company. I think those are like concepts that we have to, as a nation, implement for this to be successful.
No, it's really exciting to hear kind of what your perspective is on what we're seeing out there. And I think, I've known Optimum for a long time. I'm really excited to see what transpires over the next couple of years with the company. In closing, anything that you want to add about what's going on now or what's upcoming with Optimum that our audience should know and get excited about?
I think, from an Optimum perspective, I am super excited about the future. I think our differentiating capability is around our technology and being able to drive efficiency and demand side reduction. I think married with really strong engineering capability, helping customers to evaluate all the options with the life cycle in mind, really allows the customer to select the best solution for them in that moment. And then we can help them implement it. Because one of the most important things is when you're designing a solution and you're evaluating options, both on cost up front, the decarbonization targets, the efficiency targets, the life cycle cost, is that you meet those targets as you're going through the life cycle of that facility. Our software is designed to be able to keep those targets intact, ensure that any defection from those tracking to those targets, that you're able to fix those before they hit the balance sheet. So being able to identify that up front, do the implementation, and then ensure that those targets are met, to me is critical for success. We're super excited about the future of Optimum, and I'm super happy for our conversation today, Matthew.
Yeah, me as well. I'm really excited to see what happens. Really awesome to get to know you, and hopefully we can continue to communicate in the future. So again, Lisa, thank you for taking time to do this. This is the Decarbonization Disruptors podcast, and we will see you next time.